Welcome to Shenanigans Ensue with
Mary SanGiovanni!
I thought it interesting. We played Scott's speech from World Fantasy Convention. Ted Klein, author of The Ceremonies, was, of course, one of the founders of the World Fantasy Convention. So everything comes full circle. He worked as a movie script reader for Paramount Pictures. He was the editor of Twilight Zone magazine from 1981 until 1985. We have talked in this show many times about how influential Twilight Zone magazine was, and of course David Silva's Horror Show magazine,
right,
from which we derive our name. People forget Klein also edited Nightcry. He also edited Crime Beat magazine.
Wow. I forgot about
one that I had actually forgotten about until I was researching for this show. He ended up as the script writer. He wrote the screenplay for what he said in his own words was the worst Dario Argento movie ever made. And that was, of course, Trauma, which came out early 90s, I think 93, 94.
Okay, like that, yeah.
So, he's had a hell of a career.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you look back to those issues of Twilight Zone. Scott Edelman, David Scow, Skip Inspector, Gene O'Neill, so many of the people that have been on this show or that we've talked about on this show, it was Klein who gave them their start.
Yes.
And
I always admire writers that writers I admire, if that makes sense.
Well, and that's the thing. You talk about writers in our business.
Right.
There are three that always come to mind. Dallas Mayer, a.k.a. Jack Ketchum, Joe Lansdale, and Ted Klein. It's much like that for our generation. People used to say Tom Piccirilli,
right,
Laird Barron, Jeff Cooper. And much like Coop, Klein suffers from writer's block. He said to Doug Winter in 1985's Faces of Fear that he had struggled with writing The Ceremonies for more than 5 years before finishing it. He said, quote, "I'm one of those people who will do anything to avoid writing. Anything." That's Coop.
That's Coop, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
To talk about The Ceremonies, we should talk about his novella, The Events at Poralth Farm. Now, I say novella. I guess technically it's probably a novelette.
Okay.
But I don't want to confuse readers. We're going to call it a fucking novella, okay? The plot of that, a college lecturer isolated in the country and reading real-life horror fiction for teaching the next semester. Over the course of the novella, he realizes that a genuine supernatural horror is taking place all around him. In the novella, he was reading Anne Radcliffe, Sheridan Le Fanu, Bram Stoker, Aleister Crowley, Shirley Jackson, etc. That novella was a nominee for Best Short Fiction at the World Fantasy Convention. It's been reprinted numerous times since then, including in the Library of America's American Fantastic Tales, Terror and the Uncanny from Poe to Now.
Wow.
Which was edited by our dear friend Peter Straub.
Right.
Then what he did, he kind of did the same thing I did with Earthworm Gods. Remember, I published that as a novella. And everybody's like, there's so much more there. And so I turned it into a novel. He did the same thing in 1984. He published The Ceremonies. I don't want to say that it was an expanded version of the novella. It wasn't. But it uses the same plot as the novella. The threat this time, it's to the entire world. So it's a much grander scale. But a lot of the things, like the supernatural horror fiction, etc., are still prevalent. In fact, in The Ceremonies, of course, as you noticed in reading it, Arthur Machen's The White People factors in. Now, we haven't done an Arthur Machen episode of the horror show yet.
No, but I have done.
I was going to say, she's talked about it.
You've talked about it on
I believe I've
Shenanigans.
talked about the White People. I'd have to go back and look.
I don't I was trying to remember that while
yeah,
I
I
was reading
couldn't
your
remember
book,
if it was
but
the
I'm
great.
pretty
Oh, I know we did the Great
Great
God Pan.
I don't know that you did the white
Maybe
people.
we didn't do the white people.
Yeah,
I
but
mean-
you've talked about Mocking on your show.
Okay.
My
Yeah.
readers are undoubtedly familiar with the Great God Pan
Right.
after my novel Dark Hollow, which
Right.
owes everything to the Great
Right.
God Pan. We should do a show either here or on Cosmic Shenanigans about the white people.
Okay.
And for our millennial listeners, no, we're not talking about how I dance to Morse Day in the Time.
It's still
That
cute.
is cosmic horror. So
But here's the thing. Now, I still think this is just a superb novel. I think it's a seminal, important classic of horror fiction. However, I got to tell you, going back on this reread, I think I enjoy the original novella, The Events at Porth Farm, better. Because the ceremonies, it's over 500 pages.
Yes.
It's a long book.
It is a very long book.
And it achieves the same thing the novella achieves. So much of it felt like padding to me. That would be my only complaint. It seems very padded. But, I still enjoyed it this time around. Dave, now, how long had it been since you had read it?
I read it when it came out originally in 1984.
Okay.
I was trying to remember how I got a hold of it because, obviously no internet back then or anything. And I think how I originally was introduced to the book, and again, I'm terrible with names, but you'll know who I'm talking about. The manager, the guy's name was Jim. He used to manage various bookstores in the Harrisburg area, like Barnes and the Walden.
Yeah.
Books.
Jim Munchell.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure he recommended it to me.
Okay.
I think so because I think I bought it at the
I
Walden
could
Books
definitely see that.
where he worked.
Jim's
Yeah.
Walden Books
Yeah.
was selling more horror fiction than any other store in the chain at that time. He was having Skip and Spectre in for signings.
Right, because that's how I originally met him.
down for signings.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean he was pulling in people that
Because we went to Skip and Spectre signing at the Walden Books in the Harrisburg East Mall where he worked.
Yep.
That's how I originally met him. And of course, we were talking because at that point nobody really knew who Skip and Spectre was, so
Right.
they were like riding their chairs up and down the hallway in
Yep.
the mall because nobody was there, being entertaining like they usually are. And but I'm pretty sure he's the one who recommended the book to me, and that's how I picked it up.
Right.
It is one of my favorite novels. I'll get to what I thought about it now, though, in a minute. Since I have not read it since it originally came out.
So this wasn't a case of Richard Lehman Savage where I had such fond memories of reading it as a teenager and then rereading as an adult. I was like, yeah, no, this didn't hold up.
No.
Okay.
It held up for me. I have some things to say about it, but it is definitely I'm not sure if it's my all-time favorite cosmic horror novel, but it's up there for certain. One of the things I really like about it is cosmic horror, but it's not Lovecraft cosmic horror.
Right.
He makes his own genre or mythos or whatever you want to call it. There's no Cthulhu stuff in here or anything like that. It's all original. He mentions Lovecraft at one point because the
Right.
lead character, Jeremy, the college professor, is reading Lovecraft.
Right.
But it has nothing to do with Lovecraft, which is one of the reasons I really like the book. Like you said, I'm sure I read that original novella. I have no memory of it whatsoever, and I couldn't find a copy of it in my house, like in any collection or anything. So I did not reread that again. I wanted to reread that before I read this, but I didn't get a chance to do that. But I think reading this again, because like you said, it's just over 500 pages long. I think it would work better as a shorter work. Because while I'm reading it, especially when it first starts, there's a lot of yammering.
Yeah.
As I like to call it. Now, it's incredibly well written. I have never met Ted Klein because I could swore that I did meet him and my copy was signed, but it wasn't signed. So this is, again, one of my hallucinations. But I can tell that just from reading it that he's someone who's very precise with his language. And I'm sure
Yes.
he labors over every page,
Yes.
which is why it takes him so long to write something. But while the things at the beginning of the book are very well written, where we're getting the background of the various characters, and the one works in a library and it's a kid's library, at the end of the day, it doesn't really have anything to do with the story. It's just padding. And it's just like, okay, let's get on with it. Now, what I did like, and this maybe, again, I'm not the genius that the professor is, so maybe I'm totally off base here, and she'll tell me. But I like how it starts out, the chapter breaks are very long.
Yes.
And as the book goes further and further, they get shorter
It
and
gets
shorter, until at the end they're just like a paragraph almost because of all the action. So I thought that was a really cool technique. In general, I like the book. I think it held up. At certain points I read this book, which I can't, I read it almost 40 years ago, so I don't remember necessarily how I felt about it 4 years ago. I remember enjoying it. But at certain points, I was like, I want to punch some of these characters, especially the girl. Was it Carol?
Carol.
Yeah. At some point, I'm reading the book and I'm like, okay, seriously, this old dude is making you do all sorts of fucked up shit.
And you're not the least bit
You're
concerned.
not the least concerned. He's like buying these dresses and making you do weird dances in the middle of a park and just all this crazy stuff. And I'm just like, at what point do you say, wait a minute?
Right.
What the hell's going on here?
I get that she doesn't have a lot of experience with men, but when men start buying you dresses for you to wear for them,
yes,
that's kind of a red flag.
Red alert, yeah. And
is that what I did on my blood pressure medication? Did I buy you a dress to wear for me? Did I buy someone else a dress to wear? Dave, did I buy you a dress to wear for me?
You do that all the time, but I refuse to wear them. By the way, did you guys notice Phoebe's awesome shark and skulls dress that she had on?
I did. Yes,
isn't that
adorable.
Amazing?
It was a dress with you in mind.
Yeah, no. Well,
we've now derailed the book.
Oh well. Well, we haven't done a live show in 2 weeks, so I was going to mention the professor and I have a lot of derailing to do today to catch up.
Yeah, we do. We do.
The other thing that I was like kind of like, so you get to the end of the book and everything is happening and stuff, and then there's a 1-page like epilogue, where it's 6 months later, and the two main characters don't seem to be affected at all by what they just went through, and I was just like, what?
Yeah.
They don't. There should have been a sentence in there or something about where Carol doesn't remember what happened to her.
Right.
Because what happens to her is fucking awful in so many ways, and it's creepy and gross and disgusting. And I didn't necessarily remember a lot of this book when I went back to read it. I remembered the basic plot, but I remembered the ending. The ending is very, when you get to the final ceremony, it's very memorable. And still I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. But there's nothing. But then the epilogue has maybe one of the best final sentences ever for a book. And you have to decide whether the world ends or not. And I always go with, yeah, you're all screwed. I also enjoyed the beginning, the introduction of the book where the creature comes to Earth.
Yes.
And it's like, we're not sure what happened, but it's like the way the world will end. It's a mystery. And I'm like, yeah. Because that whole first section, which sets everything up, is very well done.
Yes.
So like I said, I enjoyed the book. I forgot. Phoebe can't read this book because I forgot about all the cat deaths.
All the cats, yeah.
Yeah, and the cat murdering and the murderous cats. And so this is not a Phoebe novel in any way. I enjoyed this. I don't know that I enjoyed it probably as much as this time around as I did back then. But it's 40 years later, and my tastes have changed a lot in 40 years.
Right. And there's a little bit that's dated.
Yeah, there's a little bit dated. Not as much as you would think, although what I was cracking up at a lot of times was when they would mention how much things cost in New York City.
Yes.
I had to pay $1.50 for a cup of coffee, and I'm like,
yeah.
Stuff like that. So that was kind of funny. It's a little dated, but again, it's a 40-year-old novel, so things are going to be dated.
Now, did you read the new edition by P.S. Publishing?
I did not. I read my original.
The original. Mary and I wonder if any of that was updated for P.S. Publishing.
I wanted to do that because I knew it was updated, but I just not had time to get to it and order it. I will say I was kind of annoyed there wasn't an ebook because I really prefer reading on my iPad because I can make the print bigger because I have terrible eyesight. So I have a giant bright spotlight I have to use to shine on the pages of the book to make it easier for me to see. But no, I went and got my original hardback out of my book collection. And like I said, I enjoyed the book. One of the reasons because this is the book I picked, and one of the reasons I picked it was because I figured a lot of our listeners, especially because we have a lot of listeners who were born after this was published, had never read it or heard of it because it had been out of print for a really long time. So I'm hoping, I saw people online saying they were reading it, so I'm going to be very curious to see what people thought about it, especially younger people. Right. But again, to me it held up. Maybe not as, I wouldn't consider perhaps as great as I thought it was before, but it held up and I was entertained. Even though I read it before, which is also something I know you guys do that, or at least I know Brian does that. I don't know if you do. I rarely read something twice.
I don't often read things
I used to do that a lot more,
and
I would certainly say in the last decade, or even maybe not a little before that, I've kind of stopped doing that.
Yeah.
I don't watch the same movies more than once or twice unless it's a really good movie. I tend not to watch, because I know, again, like Brian will watch The Sopranos every year.
Right. Well, there's movies I can watch more than once.
Yeah,
but
it depends on the movie, but I would much rather watch something I haven't seen than something I've seen.
Yeah.
And same with TV shows, like Phoebe and I just watched The Wire, for example, which I had not watched since it had been on.
Right.
And she had never seen it. So it's been 10 years since I saw it. I don't tend to repeat stuff because I personally own more books than I'll ever be able to read.
Yeah.
So I always feel like I could read one of those I haven't read yet.
Right.
You know,
Well,
that
that's
kind
the
of
thing.
thing.
I'm not nearly as fast a reader as I used to
No,
be.
I'm not either.
So I don't have time to read things more than
Yeah,
once.
I don't do that. But I enjoyed it, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too. And now, to be made look stupid, here's the professor.
Hey, we can just put the microphones down. For
Yeah,
this part.
I can take a nap.
Let me get my notes out here.
Oh, here we go.
I have notes.
She takes notes. Like, I know she takes notes. I never take notes.
Take notes. And do research. I have research.
This moment of radio silence is brought to you.
Bring in the notes. Bring in the notes. La 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 notes.
La, 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 la.
Here we
Well,
go.
while
The
she's
ceremonies.
oh,
It's
you
under
ready?
T.
Yeah, I was gonna mention
Okay.
that, but, all right.
I don't know that they could.
Wait. T for the?
Yes. That's how my phone organized it.
I like that we've done enough book clubs on this
Yeah.
show that she's alphabetizing her notes.
That's how my phone organized it.
I guess our phone organized it too. Phone's smarter than me too.
One of the first things that struck me about this, I don't know that you could update how much things cost and everything. You'd have to rewrite the whole book
Yeah.
from a modern perspective because it's very much an 80s view of the
Yes.
East Coast. And having grown up in New Jersey in the 80s, there were a lot of things that struck me as sort of interesting. There was
Wait, I forgot to do. Could you say Jersey again?
Jersey.
Woohoo!
Thank you.
Did I
Thank
do
you.
that
Thank you.
right?
Yes, that was very good. It's got a very much an 80s view of money, how money was sort of a predominant thing. And I've tried to explain this to people younger who don't understand how sharply a person's financial status divided them from other people
Right.
in the 80s. A lot of 80s movies address it, like, the rich kids versus the poor kids and things like that,
Absolutely.
which is not as much of an issue now, but it was in the 80s. Money was a very, very much a driving force. And there are, political and social reasons for that I am vaguely aware of, but couldn't do justice in explaining. However, the book acknowledges that there's a drive to make money. It's one of the driving forces behind Carol's relationship with Rosie. And it comes up between Carol and Jeremy a little bit. There's a lot of comparing the dichotomies of rich versus poor, city life versus country life. There's very much an 80s view of sex, which I'm okay with. I think by today's standards, Jeremy's kind of an asshole.
Yeah, without
he's
a doubt.
he's like a creeper.
Yeah, he is definitely a creeper. And again, like you said, it's an 80s thing.
Right.
Like
right.
this is not something you would have noticed if you read it
Right.
like back when it was written, but now you read it with
Now
our
you read, you're like,
sensibilities now, like,
wow,
ooh, you're
this guy's a
why
douchebag.
are you attracted to him? He's
Right,
terrible. That's
right.
another thing I had forgotten, like I didn't remember. The main character, Jeremy, is a terrible
He's
human.
kind of
it's
he's lazy. He's arrogant.
Yeah, he's rude.
He's
to
presumptuous.
He's very rude to the religious people that he lives with.
Yeah.
That he's staying on their farm for the summer.
He's not a likable hero
not
at all,
at
and he's
all.
not a heroic type
He's
of person.
Not
at all.
heroic. At the very end, he does something somewhat heroic, but
But see, I appreciated that.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I'm
no.
okay with that. I
okay
found
with it.
him not a particularly likable person. But again, I think that he's not. I think that he's probably less likable by today's social standards than he
Right.
would have been by 80s social standards.
Absolutely.
By 80s social standards, he would have been kind of a clueless and bumbling, like, oh, it's endearing that you have no game kind of thing.
yeah.
By today's standards, he's a creeper.
Yeah.
But so there is a very 80s view of sex, even down to the fact that, and I hate to say this, but for what it's worth, that there are still 22-year-old virgins left in the world. There are not that many of them. There's an 80s view of domestic relationships and chivalry. Things that people do then, and it's weird to be the age, like, having been alive during this period of time. I mean, I was a kid, so I was much younger than these people were in '84. But
I am, when I read it, was slightly. I would have been Carol's age. I would have been about 21, 22.
okay, 'cause
So
that's
I was right in that area. Yeah, because it's 1984.
Right.
That's when I graduated from college. So
this is, I think there's a certain nostalgic appreciation for, some of these things, which maybe makes him not as makes all the characters maybe not as unpalatable. But yeah, I thought Carol was kind of weak and naive, almost to the point of like it's hard to imagine anybody living in New York City for that long could be that naive.
I kind of got that though because she grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania and went to private Catholic schools,
right, and then a convent,
and she was a convent, and I knew, especially at that point in my life, I knew a lot of people like her who had grown up in small towns and went to private schools and were very religious and stuff, and they were inordinately naive.
Okay, because I was going to say, I mean, I went to Catholic school too, and it was almost the opposite.
But you weren't from a small town.
No, that's true.
We're talking about like the town that she lived in outside of Pittsburgh, and it's a tiny little town.
Right.
That was a lot of people that I knew in college. They went to college, but where they grew up was like,
right.
Their town had like 200 people in it in one stoplight, that kind of thing.
Right. And I think they
had not had a lot of experiences and things that we had.
Right.
Not that I grew up in some giant metropolis, but
right.
Harrisburg was considered a big town compared to where a lot of these people were from.
Yeah.
So that I bought into, and I think it's maybe just me looking through the prism of modern day versus then, where perhaps back then, somebody like that who was raised like that would be naive and just go along with all the crazy shit that the Rosie was having her do. Where I think a modern woman, even if you grew up in a small town, now you have the internet.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And 900,000 TV channels and all that stuff. So your experiences and things you're going to know about are going to be way different than they were for somebody who grew up in the 70s and the 80s.
And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I think that there's part of it is that's the point, is that she's very innocent. She's very pure in some ways without being like two-dimensional. Like, she has pride and she has lust, and there are there's urges there, there's normal woman behavior there, but it is sort of filtered through this somewhat childlike lens, which I can remember. Not many people would maybe believe this, but I can remember being a virgin. I can remember what it's like to debate whether or not, and I was a Catholic, so to debate whether or not I'm doing something wrong in wanting to share a certain degree of intimacy with somebody. I think that it's sort of a snapshot of the 80s. I think there was more 40 years ago. There was more of a sort of a widespread acceptance of, particularly religious people, and a certain degree of innocence that is gone now. And it, much like with the introduction of cell phones, it changes the dynamic of storytelling, because the things that could have happened the way they happened in the 80s wouldn't work now.
Right.
And it's unfortunate, but if you read it as a thing that happened in the 80s, then yeah, I think it absolutely works. And although I find Jeremy not particularly likable, he's not particularly a hateful character either. Like, I get it.
He's just
I get
dope.
It. Just kind of a dope.
Yeah.
But they're both kind of dope.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they were chosen.
That's why they're chosen, exactly.
I do also think it's interesting, characterization-wise, that there seems to be something of a sympathy toward the bad guys in this.
Absolutely.
And that is, I think, very forward-thinking as far as cosmic horror goes. Because most modern cosmic horror, and by modern I mean like post-2000 cosmic horror, has dipped into the idea of understanding the ununderstandable, of maybe not understanding the why, but understanding the what, and at least to an extent of how the monster feels about it. It's that idea of the outsider being the insider. We're getting to see the inside point of view from the monster's, point of view, or at least from the single cultist, I guess, that does what the monster wants.
This is one of the things that I thought was interesting about the book, is that it's not really a cult. It's one guy.
It's one guy.
He doesn't
which
have
is
any
also
assistants.
different from
it's
a lot of
very
cosmic
different.
horror.
He has no helpers. He's doing everything on his own.
Yes, it's a lot of work for a little old man.
Yeah, well, he's had a whole century to get his act together there. But I think that was the other thing interesting about the book too that I forgot to mention when I was talking is that the whole thing is it's not just his ceremony; it's everybody's ceremonies.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That it when you call it the ceremonies, it's not just the ceremonies to bring back
Exactly.
the end of, about the end of the earth. It's about all
everybody's-
the things you do in life that are actually a ceremony or a ritual, and you don't think about it, but it is.
Right.
And
Right.
I don't think I realized that when I read it back.
That's very profound, Professor Dave.
I know.
That's very profound.
Once in a while, my brain will actually function correctly, and now I'm going to go back to thinking about cartoons. So
And music in your head.
yeah,
La, la,
music
la,
and
la, la.
Pikachu's dancing. And, yeah.
But yeah, no, absolutely.
No,
I think that's very true about the
yeah,
ceremonies.
yeah.
I also get a kick out of one of the things too I wanted to address because New Jersey, is that this took place in New Jersey, which delights me. Now, here's something that most people don't know, especially now. When I moved to the town that I lived in growing up, I moved there when I was about 5, and it was in the very early 80s, and it was rural. Most people don't think of New Jersey as being rural, but it was almost as rural as, a lot of Pennsylvania is now, or a lot of the Midwest is now. It was all forests and farms. It developed quickly, and I think that's probably because of its proximity to New York City.
Exactly.
But it did develop quickly, and the way that Ted Klein describes New Jersey back then, and traveling through the parts like Newark and Bloomfield and like the parts by the city, Jersey City, all that, and thinking of that as being New Jersey, and then going out into the sticks. I mean, my parents used to be teased by the rest of my family that they'd moved out to the sticks because they'd moved to, what was most of New Jersey then, which was basically, forests and farm country.
No, you're absolutely right because it is the influence of New York City.
Yes.
And it's cheaper to live in Jersey than it is New York City. And
Exactly.
travel. It's kind of like the area around Washington, D.C.,
Right.
which most of Virginia and things used to be farmland, and now it's all concrete and steel,
Exactly.
Because, again, it's cheaper to live further
Right.
away from D.C., but obviously many people in that area, even where I live in Baltimore, people work in D.C. And
Right.
I used to do that. I used to commute back and forth to D.C. every day. I don't recommend this.
No.
But again, it's like you said, it's all farm country and stuff. And
it does inform the culture there
Oh,
because
absolutely.
People often trash New Jersey as just being like, the garbage dump of New York. But the fact of the matter is that it's called the Garden State for a reason. It's a beautiful place in many locations, even now. But it is very much influenced by New York City culture. Not upstate New York culture, but like New York City culture.
Yes.
It is, generally speaking, probably more diverse than most other states beyond, the scope of New York City. And there is, like you said, there's a commuter mindset. People live in New Jersey, but a lot of times they work in the city. They just call it the city. Mm-hmm. They work in the city, and they take some of the city home with them. So I found that interesting because as a child in the 80s, New York City was dangerous. It was a dangerous place, especially 42nd Street,
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
which was, an absolute den of sin from one end of the street to the other. It's a lot safer now, but as a kid, even in New Jersey, we were told this is not a safe place for you to be. This is a place where people get killed, So I thought it was interesting. There was one passage about New Jersey that, for my fellow New Jerseyans, I want to read real quick. There were the Pine Barrens to the south, over 1,000 square miles of them, where a man could walk all day without seeing a sign of civilization. That's true, by the way. The books told of places down there that outsiders never heard of, tiny little villages completely cut off from the rest of the state, with nothing but a church and a general store with 1 or 2 gas pumps out front. There were ghost towns, too, and towns with names like Hogwallow and Long-a-Coming, and towns with dialects all their own. Some of them weren't even on the map. And as a kid, that's actually a lot of what... we have Weird New Jersey because of places like that. We have, I think, a lot of the way that I write because that was New Jersey back then. It was Newark and Newark Airport and Jersey City and all those places near New York City. But it was also those abandoned mining towns up in northern New Jersey where there isn't anybody anymore and nobody's quite sure why. There's a lot of that kind of stuff up there, and I think it's. Ted Klein and Charlie Grant captured why New Jersey's a good place to set something, set horror because there is a lot of mystery there. Even now, there still is.
You know, you raise an interesting point. Now, Charlie Grant, we've mentioned on the show, of course, he was your mentor. Mm-hmm. Did he have any sort of? I mean, I'm sure him and Ted Klein knew each other.
Yeah, he didn't often speak of other writers, but my understanding is that he did hold Ted Klein in pretty high regard.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would have assumed he would have.
Yeah. He, there's a lot of similarity too, even in their style.
Their style
you know?
there's similarity, but also very different. Like, if you read a Charlie Grant story and a Ted Klein story, the names weren't on them, you could still pick out which one was which.
You could still pick it out,
but it's still, there's definitely some quiet horror influence in this. And then he takes things, I think, way further than Charlie Grant ever would. But
right. And that's the thing. I mean, Charlie a lot of times suggested the most horrific things.
Right. They're suggested,
but didn't say it.
And
I think I wonder sometimes too, because I fluctuate back and forth between suggesting things and then every once in a while just outright like dropping a gore bomb in people's laps. And
a gore bomb. I love that.
That's my influence on
that might be
no
you.
doubt.
But I think that's a New Jersey thing. I think there's a lot of us that strive to, because we know what other people think of us, that we strive to write something beautiful and literary and be good at what we do and talented at what we do, and have there be the subtlety and that magic of where we come from, but also that stark honesty and brutality that every once in a while slips in, because that's New Jersey in a nutshell. The way New Jersey writers write, that's our state. You know, a lot of it, I think it just gets into us. As far as the writing style, I think he absolutely has a beautiful way of beautiful turns of phrase. I like that the old ones point of view passages a lot of times are in present tense, and then other than Jeremy's journal entries, which are also in present tense, I had put that my early on note was that the old one's point of view passages are in present tense because time's irrelevant for him.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, everybody else it's told in like a regular past tense thing. The journal entries, I can see why they're in present tense, but for the old one, it's just in present tense because time is a fluid thing to him. It's almost an irrelevant thing. It doesn't much matter. He's got the time to spare, and while everything is on a very orderly and rule-driven schedule, we're talking the passage of 100 years for him, thousands of years for the master that he serves. So it is a cosmic horror scope of time we're looking at here, and I think that's sort of suggested by the present tense. I also like that there's a lot of stuff that's interconnected that you read in the background almost, and I think readers understand what I mean by that. Like, you can read details going on in almost throwaway sentences that are
there's
actually
a lot of that.
relevant
Yeah,
later.
there's a lot of that.
Things about what happened to certain people who end up disappearing and things like that, and the past connecting to the future and the future connecting to the past and the present. And it's really, he's very good with that kind of stuff. It's one of the things I admire that he does. It's one of the things I admire that Ramsey Campbell does. It's a quiet horror thing that I really find absolutely, skillful. Of course, as I mentioned, the cosmic horror aspect of this, that the entity in the tree from the prologue, the thing the little fuzzy thing, it's older than time. It's vastness. The vastness of space is inconsequential to it. It's capable of resting 5,000 years or more. And the way that it sees things, the way that the old one sees things and refers to things, there's very much a cosmic horror aspect to that. It's that sort of scope of, the stars coming right again and things happening. Now, the last thing I really want to address here, because we've covered this in Cosmic Shenanigans, and I'm not sure we've ever covered this on the horror show, but as Brian and Dave mentioned, Machen's work is referenced. In fact, the white people is an important element of one of the ceremonies.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And the white people, not that I'm going to summarize the whole thing, but basically Machen was a pagan. And believed in a lot of nature magic's, basic fundamental principles. And the white people is about forest elemental type, beings and it's about ceremonies. It's about magic and the magic of nature. Nature as an element in cosmic horror is not a new concept, but is being done, I think, in interesting ways, and is done in interesting ways in this particular book. It's an element of the supernatural as an extension of the natural, and the natural as a conduit to, the universe, to things bigger and better than what we're aware of. What I think it really means to represent is forces of nature that are bigger than us, like storms and hurricanes, tornadoes, tsunamis, things like that. Just fire, things that forces of nature that are indifferent to us, that were basically and helplessly swept up in their scope, and they're indifferent to destruction. There's a sinister personification of nature, which is in this book. It's in a lot of books that use nature as a cosmic horror element. And there's also, I guess, because Lovecraft was an atheist, and very much believed in, and you see this more in his later work, that he grounded his supernatural in the natural, like the old ones were aliens.
Right.
And what I think is fascinating about a lot of cosmic horror, which people tend to overlook when they think of in the supernatural, is that nature itself is almost a supernatural force, because its scope of time, its cycle of rebirth and destruction, and its untapped abilities, especially early on, like in the 1800s and whatnot, really lend it a sort of mysterious air, that there are forces that drive nature, and that those forces are supernatural. And any story that does that, I think, automatically wins me points. Like, I like the skill with which people make something that we tend to ignore as background, literally as background, and make it almost a character in and of itself. And that's all I have.
Well done once again, Professor.
Thank you very much.
Dave, top that.
There's cats in it.
You're listening to American Top 40. More tragedy in the news today. Kim Kardashian has a new baby. What the hell? There's nothing good to listen to. Hey, wait, what's this?
You gotta roll that out.
See, it makes me do weird things. I don't like it. God damn it.
I'd be going down on myself?
Shit.
Hey guys, it's Bill
Mick.
Maya.
And Junior.
from the Unsupervised Podcast.
Check us out every Thursday on the Project Entertainment Network.
Take a break from the stress of the world and come have a laugh with or at us.
Bill.